Get ready to play some pinball games with no quarters required.
This is Pixelated Audio, episode 22. Welcome to Pixelated Audio, your bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast. I'm Brian, and this is James.
Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, so this week we're going to listen to some music from video game pinball titles.
We've wanted to do a pinball episode for a long time, and actually when we started making the list for this episode, we came across so many games, more than 30 games, so we figured that let's break this into different episodes, and some will have a common theme, and some, like this one, will be a little bit more randomized.
Yeah, I'm a really big pinball fan, and I grew up with pinball machines like across the street. I didn't. My dad actually had a few pinball games at the house that he had purchased, used and stuff like that. Very old stuff. I mean, this is like Bally Midway, like really
right.
Old stuff. Like I think one was called like a Home Run or something like that, where like this bat. You just basically
your flipper was like the baseball bats or something.
Yeah, and it would just pitch a ball would come out of the ground pretty much. And also, there was a ton of pizza parlors around where I lived, and so going to any of these, you'd be able to play pinball games. My dad was really big into pinball, and he kind of got me into it. So pinball has a very close place to my heart.
Right, and I'm sure like a lot of us, we all love pinball, and we've had a lot of experience. I know with me traveling around with my grandpa and stuff, like going to the VFW or the Moose Lodge and stuff like that, that pinball it was everywhere. And then, back in the day, pinball was huge. Elton John even wrote a song about pinball. So.
And it's even something that if you're not big into games, if you're not big into, so somebody like my mom would be, really into, hey, there's this pinball machine. She would be down to sit and play it. She would be really into that, and she would enjoy it. And I think that's what draws a lot of people in. It's the flashy lights. It's the
they're
sounds,
gorgeous, incredible machines. When we were at California Extreme this year, they actually had one busted open, and it was all made out of clear plastic, so you could actually see all the wires, and it was just insane. I could not believe how many wires and pieces and parts, and it was just incredible. And then to see so many different varieties of pinball machines. So there's just a huge love for pinball machines.
Yeah, and this episode too, we're really only touching on a few. So we decided to do a more randomized show for this episode, where we picked out just some of the ones that kind of caught our attention. But we do have episodes planned out for stuff like the Crush series. We're going to do a whole episode on that. We already have that planned out. Like Nintendo pinball games. We have a lot of other ideas. And so when we were coming up with this pinball episode, there was too much content to cover in one show. So it kind of branched out to that.
Yeah, and kind of like our thing is we want to give the games the credit that they deserve instead of just blasting through them. So, we could have probably covered 15 pinball games in an episode, but we decided that we didn't want to do that. We wanted to really dive in and focus and see where that kind of takes us. So,
and we have a lot of good ones today too. We picked out 4 different pinball games, and they're games that I don't have a lot of experience with. So it was fun for me to kind of learn about these, and the music is going to be a lot of fun. So we have a lot of good stuff to play. But yeah, did we decide on calling this Volume 1 or something?
No, I don't know if we did or not, but I really like that. I think we should roll with that.
All right, I like it. That sounds good. The track we came in with was the title screen from Pinbot on the NES, arranged by David Wise.
It's such a great track. David Wise is incredible, as we've talked about on the show before, but I just loved it. It had these deep scales that were going on, and just I loved all the chirpy sounds and the synth, like the long notes and everything. I was just totally in love with this track.
It's a very so Pinball is like kind of a space themed game, right? So it's got this very space feeling to me.
Right.
It's got like twinkling stars and very almost like a Star Trek kind of feeling. I think it was a really, really cool way to come in. It's very electronic, but at the same time, it's very like that early like futuristic kind of, you know how
right, like what in the 90s they thought what the future would sound like, or you know, like
even
in
the
games,
60s,
like it's,
you know, like
super cool.
How Disney does like their Tomorrowlands, like it's all like stuff that you're like, oh, okay, that could be like the year 3000, but it looks like it was made like in the 70s.
Right, like you can hear that neon in it.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I like that. That's a good way to put it. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into the game.
Pinbot is a pinball simulation game released in 1990, developed by Rare and published by Nintendo. And the game is based on the Williams pinball machine that came out in 1986.
See, I have a lot of memories with the actual system itself, the actual pinball machine, but I had never played this in the past until recently doing this episode.
Right.
So for me, it was a cool thing to see like the conversion from the actual, you know, physical game to the video version. I think there was one at, maybe it was a Round Table or a Pizza Hut. I can't remember where it was, but it was near my parents' house. So I do have a lot of memories with this game, and it's pretty faithful to the original pinball machine itself, both in, you know, gameplay and aesthetics. And it adds a few new features like enemies and stuff like that.
Right, and like all pinball games, the main objective is to rack up a whole bunch of points and get a really good high score.
Right.
And this game actually adds a few extra objectives, like you mentioned, while you're playing that you get to figure out. It's really cool. In the center of the screen, you get this whole solar system, and it lets you know that you start out on Pluto. And as your high score goes up, you get to travel to different planets like, you know, Saturn and Jupiter, and eventually end up at the sun.
Yeah, and in the back of the playfield, there is Pinbot's mask or visor or whatever it is. And you have 5 different tracks, and they light up indicating different points. Like as you know, as you rack up a certain multiplier, the lights will get higher up and stuff. But there's 2 banks that you actually have to aim for, and they're basically like where would be 2 eyes in the visor. And if you get a ball lodged up in there, another one will pop out in the plunger area, and you start playing the game again. If you get another one lodged in the other eye socket, both balls will come down, and you'll be in like multi-ball or double ball mode.
Right. Yeah, and I guess if you can get up into the, you know, I think it was the blue ramp. There's a bunch of different ramps.
I think it was the blue one, yeah.
Right, and I think if you can get up there during multi-ball or, you know, like that mode, then you can get a special bonus score, which is really cool. Anyways, let's get into some music. There aren't a lot of tracks in this game, but David Wise really did a great conversion for the NES.
David Wise, yeah, Donkey Kong Country, Battletoads, Wizards and Warriors, all excellent stuff. Very well-known composer. We've talked about him on shows before, and we're going to talk about him many, many times in the future. So his name will definitely pop up.
Yeah, and what's rad is that this music is arranged from Chris Grainer's work on the original Pinbot machine, and it's a really faithful recreation. And Chris Grainer, or Grainer, I'm not really quite sure, but I feel like he is to pinball music what David Wise is to console video game music.
Yeah, he's done some video game stuff, but man, his pinball stuff is it's just it's way out there. He's done Taxi, Diner, Funhouse, Terminator 2, Elvira, The Addams Family, and like Twilight Zone, even like Simpsons Pinball. And those are just the ones like that I saw on his list that I recognize and I've played. So it's really cool to know that he's done all these amazing like pinball, you know, chiptune songs. Anyways, Pinbot was originally on the Williams System 11, and I think the System 11A actually was using the YM2151, which is we've talked about it before. It's that 8-voice FM synth chip, and also use the YM3012 DAC to convert that to an analog signal, which may or may not have made it a little bit easier to translate the sound from the YM2151 to the NES APU.
For this block, we have main background music, double ball mode, and high score name entry.
That was main background music, double ball mode, and high score name entry, arranged by David Wise for Pinbot on the NES.
Love that. I mean, it's so cool. Like, I really love that super heavy trailing bass line, like, and then those little trippy notes I thought were really cool. And it had like this echo sound to it because it fades out as it's like going back and forth. I thought it was super cool. Gave it that really empty space kind of feel. Like I felt like kind of lonely, I guess.
You know what this instantly reminded me of? Metroid.
Yeah.
The original Metroid on NES. Like
I could
really
totally see that.
had this kind of spacey, very dissonant notes, and had this. I think what made me really feel like it was Metroid was this low, very low bass, kind of sustained note that would just bong.
Right.
And it gave that really empty feeling to it. I thought it was a very cool track and really well done. And hearing it through like the NES APU is very, very cool. And it was pulled off. David Wise pulled it off very, very well.
Right. No, and for me, it kind of gave me this thought of, or this feeling like how like modern movie scores and modern video game scores have that really deep, like long notes, but like what it's missing is that melody. And for this has that very deep, like bassy, long, like vibrating sound, but it has a melody on top. And it's just, to me, it sounds so much more memorable and really cool. I really liked it. And it, like I said, gave it that spacey feel, and it's just really fun.
Yeah. Double ball mode and it's another cool track. Like it has kind of this interesting melody with that bass drop. So it's like it's doing its melody, da, 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 and then it goes, and it plays that bass. I thought that was so sick. I thought it was really cool.
Right. And it, like for me, I expected the double ball mode to play just like this. It's a little bit more fast paced, a little bit more exciting. Like, oh man, you've got two balls going at once. Like that's pretty cool. And I liked it. It kind of woke you up from maybe if you're getting into a groove of just, I know when to hit the ball and to get it to go where I want it. And it just kind of woke you up to a little bit more energy and excitement, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
The high score name entry, it's obviously a very, very short thing. You're not going to be on that screen for very long, but we wanted to include it because it is kind of, it's kind of like happy, like, hey, like you worked pretty hard for getting it like a high score. Not everybody gets their name on this board, so we're going to give you a little happy chirpy tune to throw at you. I thought it was cool.
It felt very triumphant. Like, it's over. It's more a relaxing track. It's not like any intensity or anything like that. And I thought it was very cool. It definitely made me feel really happy to be putting in my initials. And that also adds to that whole actual pinball feel, like getting to put your name that's going to show up on that marquee.
The whole point is to get a high score,
right?
And you don't see that a lot in video games anymore. It's a high score, ranking up a high score, hitting everything you can to get those multipliers and go higher and higher and higher. And I love that. I think that's what drew me into video games as a kid. I was like always like, oh, I just want to get a better score. That's how.
Yeah, even to top yourself when you couldn't play with other people. Like
exactly.
It's like, oh, how did I get that far? How did I get such a good score? And eventually it was like a whole new level, almost like a new level. You became your own boss to try to beat, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I've always really liked that. But let's get over to the graphics about the game a little bit and talk about the play fields and stuff too. The one play field.
Right.
Because I think it's very important that we kind of explain how this game works because it's different than other pinball games. I have a lot of experience myself with the original Nintendo Pinball, which was a launch game. But this game itself had a different kind of way of presenting a longer table on a very narrow or a very, very short screen.
Right. And I actually, since you mentioned Nintendo Pinball, when I started playing this, I thought, oh, this almost has a feeling of like Nintendo Pinball 2.0. Like it's more detailed, but it still has a simplistic feel to it.
It's very detailed.
Yeah.
The colors are very simple. So it has like these purples and blues and kind of like red tones to it.
Yeah, like pinkish. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very colorful. It's not a colorful game at all, but it is very, very intricate in how the sprites or the backgrounds are drawn. And I think that is what made it kind of attractive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it like you said, it's very detailed and beautiful. And I thought that all that little detail and complexity within the very limited color palette made it feel very 90s futuristic. Like we had mentioned how the music had this 90s futuristic sound, that the look of this game is actually, it's very neon-ish, but it's very simple. Like you said, very few colors, but they're very bright and vibrant, a lot of contrast.
And that's how it was in the actual arcade too. I remember it feeling like very futuristic, even though the machine was very, very old, early 80s or mid 80s. And what was really cool too, let's talk about the playfield a little bit, because it is a very good recreation of on the NES of the actual playfield from the original machine. And so the way that Rare decided to program this is they didn't have multiple screens like we see in a lot of other pinball titles for, video games. And what they decided to do is usually when you leave, so for example, let's kind of back up a little bit. When you leave where your flippers are and the ball goes up to the top, usually the screen kind of follows the ball.
Right.
But what Rare decided to do is they decided to cross hatch like the bottom or
almost like how you can get like a 2-player split screen, but
exactly.
it just always stays on the bottom at the flippers.
Right. So your view of the flippers actually never moves, but when the ball goes up to the top of the pinball table, your view is split and you see the flippers at the bottom and then you see the rest of the table at the top. So for me, it was a little bit awkward at first because I wasn't expecting that, and I've never played another game that is like that.
Right.
And so it took some getting used to, but being able to see your flippers at the bottom really made it easier because when the ball is falling down from like the top, like where like Pinbot's visor is and stuff like that, you can already see where your flippers are.
Right. Yeah. So you can kind of see the trajectory of the ball, and like we know back in the day, those CRT TVs some of them were pretty big, but they were still square, and pinball tables are not square. So yeah, they had to have
very not square.
Yeah, so they had to really come up with some creative solutions to make it work on a square screen with the limited resolution. I mean, they could have tilted the table on the screen back far enough so you could see the whole thing, but it'd be very difficult at the top. So they do have the table tilted a little bit, but then they, like we said, has the bottom of the screen stays stationary and it scrolls up, which I thought it was very neat. I thought right off the bat it felt very unique. And I thought it was fun. Once you got used to it, it definitely became really kind of cool.
Right. And I think the playfield does represent the actual pinball machine's playfield very, very well as far as, the conversion to an 8-bit graphic style. I mean, there's only so much you can do within those limitations. But I think it does a really good job. Even the box art kind of mimics the pinball marquee a lot. I mean, it's very much more vibrant than the actual game itself. The box art is very, very cool for this game. I like it. But shifting focus over to the physics of the game, I think that those are what were the most accurately redone as far as, we could talk about graphics and stuff like that. And there is a huge downgrade because we're going from a real life machine to an 8-bit kind of core. And the physics, I think, are what made this game very fun. And I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with this game. This was one of the first ones that I popped on to play for this episode, and it was really a great start. I thought it was unique. It was fun. It had great sound, great graphics, and like you said, the physics of the game worked really well. Like sometimes we see pinball games where they're kind of floaty mechanics, like the ball doesn't feel like a heavy steel ball like in the actual arcade, and this one felt very true.
The only kind of complaint I think I have about it is that when a sound effect would play, like a voice or something, everything would freeze on the screen. Obviously, that doesn't happen in the real game.
Right.
Everything keeps moving because this is real life kind of thing. Everything's in real time. But for this, I think in order to process those voices, they had to stop everything else to concentrate on that. But it had pretty good reviews for the most part. I mean, I was looking at a few different review sites and websites, different stuff like GameFAQs and stuff, and a lot of people say that it was pretty close to the actual machine. I feel the same way about that. But on the flip side, they didn't care for the additions like enemies and stuff like that, where for me, I thought that was actually kind of a cool kind of new take on this game that I already knew.
You couldn't do that in an actual cabinet, an actual pinball machine, have something moving around and something to interact with in that way. So I thought it was a neat little fun addition. And actually one little fun addition that I thought was a nice little touch was at the bottom of the screen near the flippers, there's actually the Williams logo. Because like we mentioned, this is cool. This is actually based on an actual real Williams cabinet. And I just thought it was so cool because I recognized that Williams logo right off the bat. And I was like, oh, wow, that's awesome. And I think for a lot of people that would give them, that may not be familiar with the Pinbot, the original, maybe this isn't like something, because you wouldn't expect, Nintendo would have put like their logo or something there.
Right.
So it's just kind of like, oh, that's cool that this is like a hint that there's another one out there. Like,
they tried to keep that original feeling. I think they tried to transfer that over especially for the veterans too. You know, a lot of people were moving away from arcades and stuff and pinball stuff to home consoles. It was becoming more, prevalent, and I think that this is one of those things like, hey, like we're still paying homage to this original stuff.
Right, and I think for the NES and stuff like that, a lot of the people that were purchasing the consoles were people that were probably really big into the actual pinball machines. And
like my dad.
Yeah, and like my dad too. So it was like, for them, that's an extra little fun thing. Like, oh, I've played this one. Like for us, we get excited. Like, oh, I played like the Game Boy version of this game. And for them, they're like, I played the real life pinball cabinet. This is pretty cool.
So anyways, let's move over to the next pinball title.
Awesome. It's actually a really interesting one.
Yeah, the track is from a specific table in the game called Beatbox. This is Pinball Dreams on the Amiga, composed by Olof Gustafsson.
That was Beatbox for Pinball Dreams on the Amiga, composed by Olof Gustafsson.
Man, what a sick track.
Yeah, I love it.
I thought that was so cool. That guitar that just like comes in and plays these really shrill, distorted, like reverb notes. I thought that was just way funky, way cool. I don't know. It's a loop track. It's not a lot to it, but I thought it was a cool way to bring in this next game.
Right, and I got like this almost like an industrial feel, like almost like it was like homemade instruments making the song. Like it was very cool and very heavy, very forceful, which is a little bit different than what we heard for the first game that we played for Pinball. And this was more like, I felt aggressive, kind of like you're going to notice this music and it's going to be awesome. So yeah, I love it.
No, I think that the track is really cool, and it's short. It's like 30 seconds. So we played a double loop on it, so you could get a little bit more taste for it, rather than putting like this hint idea out there and then it's already over. Play a little bit more, but it is a fun track, and the game is pretty interesting itself.
Pinball Dreams was originally released in 1992 on the Amiga, and in 1994 it came out for the SNES. And it actually came out on a bunch of other systems like DOS, Game Boy Advance, Game Gear, iOS, PSN, and even a fan-made version on the Game Park. But today we're only going to be playing tracks from the Amiga and the SNES.
Right. It was published by 21st Century Entertainment on the Amiga, and the Super Nintendo was published by GameTech. The developer of the game is Digital Illusion CE, and they were later known as DICE. And we talked about DICE before on our Syrinx episode. It's a demo scene, a former demo scene group composed of members of like the Silence and stuff, and they got together, and a lot of their programming stuff is very, very well done, very kind of out there, and their music is always very demo scene like, and I think that was really, really cool. The game was originally composed by Olof Gustafsson on the Amiga, and subsequent ports had their own arranging composers, such as Martin Walker on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, and this game had some really decent ports, like the DOS, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and even the Game Gear version, and the music was really kept up well with the original. Yeah,
the DOS version is probably the most accurate compared to the Amiga. Even though it included the mod-based original music tracks, it also had an alternative like MIDI soundtrack for use with the Roland MT32. And I listened to the Roland stuff, and in comparison, like compared to the Amiga stuff anyway, it kind of sucked. It had like weird notes and different pitching. It just made it very awkward to listen to.
Right, and on that note, let's get into our first block for this game.
Sounds good.
First up, we have title music from the Amiga version. Then we have a track from the Nightmare Table on the Amiga version, and then the Beatbox intro for the Super NES version.
You just heard title music and the Nightmare Table on the Amiga version, composed by Olof Gustafsson for Pinball Dreams. And then we played Beatbox Intro on the Super NES, arranged by Martin Walker.
Wow, that first track, the title music, I don't think I've ever written so many notes on a single track.
Yeah,
ever.
There's, and the thing about this track too, and I've been listening to it kind of in the car for like the last few days, like just like on my way to like work and stuff.
Right.
You think the track is over, and then it starts back up. And so I want to apologize to you listening, because you're probably thinking to yourself, like, what track? What track started
Did they
where?
just play 8 songs?
Yeah, no, that was one.
Right.
And
first 5 minutes was one song.
Yeah, the first 5 minutes, 30 seconds or so was one track. But it's really cool. It goes through all these different kind of, different phases, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of slap bass that's really funky that we get in a lot of Amiga stuff. And I don't know, this track itself just has so many cool like movements that it goes through. It like changes my mood. Like there's really like funky parts, really like kind of hip hop kind of sound, really synth power ballad, and then moving over to like this heavy rock and roll. I just think it's really awesome.
Right. No, when I was listening to it, I was like, wow, did it switch to a new track? Because each track felt a little bit different. And like towards the beginning, there was kind of like this 80s, 90s like synth pop kind of sound, and then
very Euro sounding.
Yeah, and then it kind of evolved into this like funky-ish more sound, and then it grew into more of a rock and roll type sound. And I was like, wow, this is really neat. But I could see some of the elements from the previous section carry over into the next one, so it almost felt like this building.
It's like a story kind of telling like this like new, it's like a new chapter,
right,
building off of what the last one did, and then kind of creating something new based on that original kind of idea. And I think that what made me really like this track too is that it does start off kind of slow, and it just builds over and over in the course of the the 5 minutes that it plays.
Right, and we see that a lot in video game music. Like it'll have a different, softer or simpler intro part to it, and then it takes off in a whole different direction or builds into something more intense. And this, it's like it builds in a different way, and I thought it was really cool that it has this section, and each section builds to a certain point, and then it kind of stops, and there's like a new branch kind of to that tree, and it goes off into a rock direction and stuff like that. And I was just like, this is really cool. And towards the end, like I was just
full
blown away.
intensity,
Yeah, I was like, when all those instruments come in there and the guitars and all that stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is so nuts. Like I can't believe I missed out on so much Amiga stuff. Like this is so good.
Yeah. And it was kind of between this and the Super NES version. And the only reason why we went with the Amiga version over the SNES is because the SNES, it's very, very faithful and sounds very similar to this version, but it has a little bit of like kind of like a fuzz behind it, like a little bit of like a compression. So this version is definitely a lot more clean. So putting it in was, I think, was the right choice.
Right. And I love hearing things how they're originally composed. And the same thing goes with that Nightmare Table track.
Wasn't that rad?
That was super
that
cool.
Was so rad.
Instantly I had like this more horror feel to it. Like it was creepy. And then those chimey melody.
The church bells?
Yeah, like the key. It came in, and I was like, wow, that was really cool. And then it just left. It was gone. And I was like, wow, that was really cool. They didn't overdo it. And it was like this nice little touch to the song.
It really felt like you're in like this nightmare setting, I guess, because the bass takes over the melody. And when that happens, there's something off. The church bells, I mean, that's a dead giveaway. Like that, this is like some kind of satanic kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that was cool, a cool touch, especially for a pinball game.
Yeah. No, and it was just great sound. It was great little melody too. So it was almost like, oh, what was that? What was that? Oh, was that something over there? And because it's already building like this uneasy vibe. So it's very cool. I can easily see how that would fit into more of like a Gravedigger type look to the game.
Right. So moving over to that SNES track that we played, that was the beatbox intro. This was a really cool track for the Super Nintendo. I thought it did a very, very good job, and it's very faithful to the Amiga version. So I thought, let's put this in, because if you played the Super Nintendo port, this is the track that you remember. It is a little bit different how it's arranged on the Amiga, and how Martin Walker decided to kind of loop the track. It's a little bit different. So I thought this version was kind of cool, and I think that's why we thought to kind of mix it up and put it in there.
Yeah, no, it's great. I definitely love hearing when a game comes across different systems, hearing how it turns out on a different system. And the SNES version was really good. It had a really cool, like, funky bass line to it. And then when it kind of drops out, I was like, wow. And by the end of this track, it's just like, oh, all those instruments together, they work so well. So Martin Walker did a really good job.
Yeah, a lot of like hip hop kind of feeling in there for me. The echoes I thought were really, really cool. And it's got that, I think the whole way through, it's very like heavy drum and bass sound. And I think that's what made this track really, I mean, the table itself that you're playing on is called Beatbox, and it's kind of has that kind of hip hop rap theme. So I think this really kind of can relate to that. What they were trying to go for, the message they were trying to convey really came across in this track.
Right. And one of the things that we really love about the Amiga is that there's this great like demo scene background to it all. And there's like this camaraderie. And one of the cool things that happened was that since DICE has such a big root in the demo scene, they all kind of banded together and said, hey, you know, like let's
all these crackdro groups and stuff
like
that were like, hey, let's stay away from
let's make a pact to kind of just, you know, they're one of us, like let's kind of leave it alone. But I mean, eventually it did get cracked, but it was just really cool to see them all kind of group together and say, you know what, this is kind of special. And I thought it was really nice.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And Digital Illusions actually had their own tracker, and it's a mod based tracker, but it made it really, really difficult to rip some of this music. And the same for the Super Nintendo stuff too. Is really it's crazy because when you look at all the different variations of music in the Super NES version, like when you get like different balls and different pins or when different scores and stuff like that, different things happen on the table. When you add up all those variations, I mean, there's just so much music, and I thought it was really cool. The Game Boy version that we were actually going to add in here, but we decided to kind of hold off on it. It's really, really cool stuff. But that was super easy to rip. And so, you know, it was, the most difficult stuff actually made it into the show. But the Game Boy stuff was pretty cool. Instead of like a lot of those sustained like synth sounds, those are all replaced by pulse waves. So it's really cool in its own way. It just didn't fit with what else we're playing on the Super NES and the Amiga.
So let's actually talk about the game a little bit.
So Pinball Dreams is like every other pinball game. The objective is exactly the same, you know, achieve your high score, set new records, and whatnot. But this game actually has 4 different tables to choose from. And it starts out with like this list on the menu, and you get to pick each one that you want to play. And it's kind of cool because it gives you a little bit of a variation on where if one gets too stale, you can kind of move over to the next one. The first table that we are going to talk about is Beatbox. And I think this is like kind of probably the crappiest table, actually. The music is very, very cool, and it's actually my favorite music. But the table itself and the play mechanics are kind of crappy. It's based on a hip-hop rap theme, and the ramps actually have no labels, so it's very hard to tell what you're doing.
Right, and visually, this game seems much more simplistic than some of the other tables that we're going to talk about, and the color palette is very kind of odd. Like there's like a very dark blue background and this very bright orange, like what would be kind of like the metal parts of the pinball
or the
machine.
Plastic even.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, you know. I think too, for me, this table, what threw me off was when the ball would go into the background, like there's like this boombox area where you kind of hit these bumpers. You can't see the ball. So like you don't know where your points are, and I think that's why I think for me, especially for me, like this table I didn't like it. Couldn't see my ball half the time.
Right, and this one visually looks more just kind of thrown together compared to some of the other ones. So I can definitely see how this would be not the most fun one to play.
Yeah, the music is pretty rad though.
Right, especially.
So moving on to the Steel Wheel. It's themed after the Old West. It's pretty cool. It's a basic table, roughly based on the Williams Bad Cats table that came out in 1989. I think this is a really, really cool one.
Right, no, I definitely agree. I think the images, the colors, all that stuff, it's definitely more complex. There's a lot more labeling. There's different images that are going on in the background. There would be kind of like the under part of where the ball's rolling on.
Right.
It's got these really cool like steel ramps that are just like the little bars. It looks really cool. Very much like a real pinball machine.
Right. And the steam engine, like in the background, the different kind of motifs that hint at that Old West. I think it's really cool. The bumpers themselves too have like kind of this like pow pow kind of like gunshot kind of look to him, and I think that's rad. The music itself is pretty legit. So, and we have a little bit more for that later on. Nightmare. This table is based on like a graveyard theme, so it's got this kind of eerie. We played a track already from the Nightmare table, and like we were saying, it's just like this really distorted kind of like church bell sound, and the table itself, the playfield represents that. It has a lot of those graphics.
Right, and at first, when I first saw this table, I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty simple. But looking at it in a little bit more detail, I'm actually really surprised. I really like the look of this one. The color palette is more subtle. There's a lot more like teals and greens and like very kind of muted colors. It gives it that kind of like haunted look. There are some reds and oranges, but altogether the whole table as a whole looks very cool colored. And to me, that makes it very kind of eerie and creepy. And it also has some of those steel tube ramps, a lot more labeling. The bumpers look really cool.
A lot more labeling. That's you nailed it. That's one thing that like drives me nuts. Why I didn't care for beatbox, because you can actually see what the score labels and ramps are for this table, and I think that was really cool.
Yeah, it's got a cool little image of like a kind of like a church and like a graveyard in the back, and it fits really well. It's something you can see. Like sometimes in pinball machines, you kind of have too much going on, and this has some very simple areas. And
I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well, I mean, I think there's a time where there's too much and it's good in a good way, and then there's too much where it's not like well organized or designed. I feel like the beatbox one, they could have done more research on what like a 90s hip hop thing kind of looked like, whereas like cowboys and like graveyards, it's a very defined theme, so it was easy to just automatically pull, whereas like, you know, hip hop and stuff like that was kind of newer.
They didn't watch enough like Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, In Living Color.
Yeah.
They probably could have themed it after that and been a lot better off.
Yeah, because you could definitely see that the Steel Wheel and the Nightmare had a lot better idea behind it.
Yeah, I think so too. It's weird too, because this playfield, it doesn't say Nightmare anywhere on the table. It says Graveyard, and you light up each letter in Graveyard, but it doesn't actually say Nightmare. And I thought that was interesting, because every other table has the title somewhere written on it, like most pinball cabinets do. They have, you know, like the game name written somewhere out, and this didn't. So that was interesting. They call it Graveyard. And I mean, that's it on the table, but when you go into the menu, it's actually listed as Nightmare. So
yeah, it's a really cool theme.
Yeah, I think it was really cool. Anyways, the next table that they have in the list is called Ignition, and this is space themed. The goal is to fuel your ship to make it all the way to Mars. It's a really rad kind of table, I think, itself. I think playing this was really fun.
Yeah, I could see this one translating to an actual cabinet, like an actual physical pinball machine, pretty well. It's got a really cool color scheme, a very dark background with some dark blues, kind of like a night sky, like a outer space type sky, and there's like some really dark reds in there to kind of give it some variety, but not draw your attention. And then you have like these really cool red bumpers and bright blues for different labeling and stuff like that, and it just is a really good looking machine.
It kind of has that Pinbot feel to it, because you know, that space theme. This is like a rocket ship, space. There's a lot of those kind of motifs thrown in there, and I think that this was really, really cool. You get like different moons and stuff in the background. The ramps are all labeled. The table is laid out very, very well. There's different kind of chutes and stuff near the top of the playfield. The top is almost like an upper table. It's almost lifted, and you have to kind of shoot the ball up, and it takes a little bit more of a dynamic, because the physics change once you get into that area. And I thought, you know, this is another very, very cool addition to the game.
Yeah, and on that note, let's get into the next block. We have Steel Wheel from the Amiga, and then we have Steel Wheel High Score from the SNES.
You just heard Steel Wheel on the Amiga, composed by Olof Gustafsson for Pinball Dreams. And then we played Steel Wheel High Score for the Super NES, arranged by Martin Walker.
Wow. Those were pretty cool. You could definitely see that Wild West feel, but not so much like how we had that Wild West feel in the Wild Arms episode. This was like more of the fun, like kind of like silly, like Wild West. Like,
it's not like that spaghetti Western kind of feeling to it. This is a very happy banjo kind of,
right.
Wild West feel to it. I thought it was rad.
Kind of like what you would see in a cartoon versus a movie.
Right.
But yeah, it was super fun. I really liked it. It had that just such cool like banjo-ish parts, but it had like a modern feel, a modern at the time feel laid in there with it, which I thought was a really cool idea.
Right.
So it had like this Wild West theme with this really kind of cool, like awesome beat with it. So.
Yeah, the banjo too, like the pitch bending that they pull off.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, it's funny. Like the first time I heard it, I was just like, what? Mm-hmm. Like it's so fun. It's such a cool idea, and it made me smile the whole way. I think I was actually in the gym, like working out when I was listening to this music, and I'm like, I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's probably 20 other people in the gym working out, listening to Amiga music and Super NES music. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Can't be. And I was just sitting there smiling. I was just like, oh man, dude, this is fun.
No, I could totally see it. Like it totally made me feel like you're on the front porch with like like you got the grandpa with like the moonshine jug and like having fun.
Did you ever see that episode of Family Guy where they're like, warm out today? It was warm out yesterday.
Yeah, I think I did see that one.
No, it just reminded me of that. No, it's really cool. It's like that. Like I love that banjo. I think it's so rad when it's put into game music and it's executed well. And I think this is a very good recreation of a Wild West theme for a pinball table, because it's not like a distracting track. It's an engaging sound. Yeah. I think it makes you want to keep popping in the quarters or.
Well, for an actual cabinet, maybe, but for the
Amiga
video game version, it's like. But for me, the next track, the high score one, was just incredible.
That was a blast.
It was like I actually liked it better than the actual game music, the table music, and I was just having so much fun listening to it. It was so amazing. Like
we were just looking at each other,
away.
cracking up like the whole time. The whole track, we were just cracking up.
And it's a really long track, so I get like, how long does it take to enter your name? But this would be a track that I would just sit there as long as it would let me play this song. Because a lot of times when you're entering your name, stuff like that, there's like 30 seconds. And if you don't enter it, it's just like whatever. You got 2 letters in, that's all you got. But this, if it let me listen to it for 5 minutes or let it loop for 20 minutes, I would just sit there and listen to it. It's
funny because Chase, when we were talking to him in our expansion pack 4, he was like, oh man, if you're my friends and you know me, like I could just listen to, like I don't care about repeats. I can listen to stuff. Oh yeah. Like this is like one of those tracks I could just listen to over and over and over and just not be bored of it. And I mean, like I have my windows rolled up driving to work, and like people, Bay Area traffic is horrible, and people are looking at me, they're all pissed off, and I'm just sitting there listening to like banjos playing. I'm just like, hey, what's up?
That's why other people need to get into game music.
No, I think it was really fun. It was a really cool game. The gameplay is a lot faster than the other titles that we're covering and that we've covered so far. And I think altogether the soundtrack really is what kind of pulled it off. And I don't know. I think that's why we're seeing so many ports actually, because not only were the tables well designed for the most part, and they're simple, but they're executed well. And a lot of pinball games are very simple. So the music adding on top of that, I think, is just excellent. And I'm glad this was a new find for me. I never played it until researching for this episode.
Right. And I mean, and Olof Gustafsson really set the bar high for these games when he originally composed the Amiga stuff. And then I could see it being a really fun challenge for other composers when it was brought to a different system. And, composers like Martin Walker did an amazing job. Like that Super Nintendo sound was just really good.
So we were talking about adding the Game Boy music in here, and I played the Game Boy version just to check it out, because I was curious myself, like how is it? And it's a lot simpler on the Game Boy, obviously, but it's still just as fun. It's fast, it's very quick moving, but it was cool, and I'm very glad that we found this title.
Right, and really looking into some of these pinball games, you could see that they are something that they're already toned down compared to a real cabinet, and they do translate really well to just about any handheld consoles. They work really fun. I've really never come across a pinball game that I've actually hated. So
yes, and since we talked about the Game Boy, we're going to move over to the Game Boy for our next pick, and the music you're going to listen to is the title screen from Revenge of the Gator, composed by Hiroaki Suga.
you just heard the title screen from Revenge of the Gator on the Game Boy, composed by Hiroaki Suga.
I think like that track is, well, I mean, obviously it's kind of like the Stray Cat strut on, you know, that jazz piece. I mean, it's cool. It's a cool little track. It's a happy, funky little track. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's fun. So it to me as a title screen just kind of sets you up to like you're gonna have a little bit of fun here. So
and the game is kind of silly too. It's like there's a bunch of like alligators slapping a ball around and you're hitting them and
and it's like a little like cutesy kind of style. So
I think the music really reflects that. Why did we pick this game? I don't know. You actually were the one like, hey, you know, like, we gotta do Revenge of the Gator. And I was like, really? You got like some attachment to this? And, like, no, we just got to do it.
Yeah, no, it was just a game that to me I was interested in. Yeah, like I liked the box art to it a lot. I thought it was very very cool, like 80s 90s style, like very airbrushed, and you know, like alligators and things like that. So the game actually came out on the Game Boy in 1989, and one of the reasons why I was excited about this was I saw that it was HAL Labs. So this game was developed and published by HAL Labs.
Very cool.
And later on, this game came out on the Virtual Console for the 3DS. Right. And that's another thing that kind of struck me, is that it seemed very familiar, and then I remembered, oh yes, I've seen this on the 3DS eShop. So
yeah, in the Virtual Console, part of the eShop. Yeah, that's right. It was composed by Hiroaki Suga, and Hiroaki wasn't typically a composer. He was primarily a programmer and a producer over at HAL, where he still works today, actually, which is pretty cool. I mean,
that's awesome,
he's still there today. This was composed in 1989, so you know that he must either like it, but you know, Japanese businessmen like their company is their life, so
right,
that could be it. Anyways, he did music for a few other titles as well. He did Rollerball on the MSX and the NES, Mach Rider for the Famicom, and Famicom Grand Prix 2 for the Famicom, obviously, and Shanghai on Game Boy, and Wario Woods for SNES.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's a few other titles he's done, but most likely these kind of off-the-wall, bizarre, Japanese, obscure stuff. So other than that, though, this game itself, it's actually a pretty fun little game.
Yeah, no, I really liked it.
Yeah, there's 4 different modes that you can play. There's 1-player, 2-player, which is basically the exact same game, but you kind of trade off between a friend, right? It's like Pac-Man, where if you play, 2-player game, you're not playing together. You're just taking turns.
Yeah, just pass me the Game Boy.
That was never fun because you can't see what the other player's doing.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, on the Game Boy, it was hard enough to see what was going on the screen anyway. So looking over someone's shoulder didn't really help.
Right. Me and my brother had a few games like that where we'd have to trade off, and it was like, well, this is no fun. I mean, I can't tell what he's getting until like he shows me at the end, hey, I beat your score, or like whatever like that. There was also a match play mode, which is actually pretty cool because on the box art, the game actually shows that you can use the Game Boy Power Link cable and link 2 Game Boys together and play a match between each other. And it's kind of like, I want to say it's kind of like Pong in the sense that you can see each other's screen, but you're kind of flipping the ball back and forth with your flippers and trying to, I don't know, get more points and stuff than the other player. There's a few different obstacles and items and stuff like that, I guess. I didn't play it 2-player. We didn't actually play this together. We don't have a link cable, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could have tried it out.
That would have been pretty awesome.
Yeah, the playfield itself is kind of unique. It's one playfield, but there's a few different screens to go through.
Right, like you can start out maybe towards the top, and then when you fall through the flippers, you don't die. You actually drop down to another level that has its own set of flippers and its own kind of layout, which is really neat, and you can actually find your way back up to the top. So for this one, once you get to the bottom and you do fall through the flippers, you fall into a room that has a little cute alligator that eats your ball, and it's kind of neat. So there's almost like this fun little animation of you died.
Yeah, like his tongue like pops out,
yeah.
like swallows the ball. It's the most ridiculous thing, but it's kind of funny because this game, there's not really much to it, but there's alligators like thrown all over the place. They're either dancing like on the sides of the walls, or their tail is whipping out from the sides.
That was one of the things I really liked. You would get the ball into this little spot, and the ball would stop, and then one of the alligators on the side would whip it with its tail, and it would go flying off. It was really kind of fun. I mean, these neat little touches like that, and there was these other little guys that I'm not quite sure if they were alligators or not, but you could hit them, and their mouths would open, and if you got the ball in there, then you could go either get popped out someplace else, or I think the middle one would take you to like a bonus
round. Yeah, no, I think those were alligators, because I think like it was just their heads that were like coming out
of
like
poking out of the water.
Yeah, something like that. Because I was like really paying attention. I was like, what are those things? And then their face kind of looked like the other alligators in the game, but it's really hard to tell. Anyways, like what you were saying about the bonus levels too, it's really neat because you would go into these. It's almost like an alleyway kind of breakout style bonus level where you'd have to get different kind of blocks that you'd have to break away for extra points. But it looked like around the walls there were like these little alligator teeth sticking out. And
that's cool. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, and you could hit those and you would get more like a multiplier or something like that. So I thought it was a cool little touch. The game itself is extremely basic, but like we were saying earlier, it's actually pretty fun.
Yeah, no, I was surprised. I haven't played too many Game Boy games, especially Game Boy Pinball. The only thing I could really compare it to is another HAL Labs game, which is Kirby Pinball. And,
right.
And I saw a lot of similarities, even the kind of music, the multi-tiered screens, the same way you kind of go to the bonus areas and stuff like that. So it just had a very fun, non-licensed like feel to it. It was a very cool game, and also, I just really enjoyed it.
Also, the death sequence. You had mentioned that, and I think you should bring that up because that was a cool point.
Yeah, so like I mentioned here, that once you fall through the final set of flippers, you kind of fall into a room, and the alligator eats you. Like in the Kirby one, you fall through and you land on a cloud, and you can possibly get your way back up. So it's almost like an extra chance before you lose the ball. So it was that there immediately was something that reminded me of the Kirby game. So
this game, I never grew up playing it. I don't have any experience other than for this show, but I had fun. I thought it was really cool. The playfield itself isn't too dynamic. There's not a lot going on, but sometimes you want that for a pinball game. You don't want too many distractions. You want to be able to work on certain like challenges and obstacles on the playfield, and having just too much busy stuff going on kind of takes away from it, and I think that this actually did a really good job. Well,
and one of the things that I liked about this too is it's different compared to the other pinball games that we've talked about today, because there's no scrolling. So your play field it all fits in the square screen. If you can bump up to the next play field, it just takes you up there, and there's once again no scrolling. So the only time there is any type of scrolling is when you fall through the flippers. And I really liked that because I could see everything that was going on. I knew where the ball was going. I could kind of predict where the ball was going to end up. So I really liked that.
And I think when it fell from like a higher screen, it also gave you enough time to kind of anticipate where it's going to be later, rather than just it falls down like to the next screen, all of a sudden you're screwed.
Right.
This game was pretty good about, hey, the ball's falling, like take your time and figure out where you need to kind of recollect what your mission or what your goal is here, and get back into it. We have a few more tracks to play, actually. We're going to play the main background music, and then we're going to play match play, and then we're going to play match play results screen.
That was main background music, match play, and match play result screen composed by Hiroaki Suga for Revenge of the Gator on the Nintendo Game Boy.
Wow, just some really goofy stuff.
Yeah, no.
Seriously. It's a poppy, peppy, poopy little track.
Yeah, no.
I don't know how to explain it.
It's very short and fun, but in that short time with those real short loops, it was just fun. And it just made you feel like you were going to have a good time, I think.
Yeah, like you're, skipping through the woods. I say that a lot, don't I?
I think so, a little bit, yeah.
Anyways, so no, these tracks are short. There's not a lot going on. It's trying to keep your attention, your focus on the machine, not so much worry about like this kind of crazy background stuff. And this game is like we've said a few times already, it's a very simplistic game. There's not, this extreme depth to it. So keeping it very simple and keeping it basic, I think, is what the developers had in mind.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I played this game, the music was fun, and it didn't stand out to where I was like, oh, I'm just listening to these loops over and over and over. And, like main background music was fun. It was very silly and fun. It had a good loop to it. I really liked the match play just for the fact that it had this kind of ramping up and down, and it really made me have the feeling of a two-player back and forth. Like one is kind of the higher and one is kind of the lower, and it goes just back and forth. And
right.
I really like that. So
for me, match play, that was like the dumbest melody like I've ever heard. But the bass line I thought was really cool. I thought the bass line was really rad. It's like it had this darker feel to it. I mean, hear me out here, because this track is goofy as it is, but I really thought the bass line kind of sold that track for me. Yeah. And the melody was just like this, just like dopey, goofy, kind of.
Well, I could see that there was a bit of competitiveness to that one. So, I mean, because you're playing with another person. So, but then the match play result screen, that was just really fun.
It was fun.
It was super. It was a lot more energetic, and
I liked that. It was a whole 15 seconds or so, but we looped it a few times. But I thought that was a cool little track. I thought it worked well for like a result screen. I start up another round and have at it. I thought it was all right.
And that was one thing that I did notice just from the pinball games that we've played, is that the result screen or like the enter your name screen seemed like a little bit more energetic than the actual level, and which I thought was kind of interesting, that maybe it's like, okay, let's go again, like let's get you more excited to go again, whereas for other games it seemed like the result screen was a little more mellow, kind of like, oh, you're done. Like it's not as intense now. So I thought that the pinball one, it almost like sets you up to want to play again, just to turn around and keep going. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Maybe that's what they were going for. I'm glad you brought that up. I guess I didn't really think about it too much, but now that you mentioned that, it's like, okay, yeah, I can see that. It's like start again, try it again. Whereas a lot of game over screens or result screens is like, hey, like, look, you did it, like you're done, kind of thing. And this really did feel like, hey, give it another shot, dude. Like you could do better. You could do better.
Right.
This game, though, what are your thoughts on it? Because you were saying you really liked it, and I would have to agree with that.
I did really like it. This is one that I would like to get the cart to throw it in my collection. They only have it in there with Kirby Pinball and some other fun little Game Boy games. It was just fun. I didn't have a lot of gripes about it. I really liked, like I said, the no scrolling. I think on the Game Boy that would have been really difficult, and it just was poppy and fun. And for me, I really enjoy retro games that are fun. Like some retro games are like, oh, I'm badass. Like I'm doing something really cool, or I might be a little bit, violent and edgy. Yeah. But I've always I found that, especially, on Nintendo consoles, I just really love fun games. Even now, like even modern games, if it's fun, I'm going to keep playing it.
Right. And, other review sites and stuff really said good stuff about this game. I mean, for the most part, it got better than average reviews. Like Nintendo Life gave it a 7 out of 10. EGM gave it wasn't the best score. They gave it a 6.25 out of 10. I don't know what their rating system is, but most of the reviews that I saw from individuals on like GameFAQs and stuff like that were giving it like high 8s or 9s. Even like one guy gave it like a 10 out of 10, and I was just like, wow, so other people are liking this game. So it's not just, this was an organic feeling for us that we're like, oh, this is really fun. And other people, I think, are having the same experience. So that's awesome.
I saw some of the reviews kind of like how you see movies. Like critics are really harsh on a movie. But then if you look at the reviews based on the viewers, it's usually a little bit higher. When I thought that was kind of the case. Like critics might have been pretty harsh on this game, or in some cases harsher than maybe they needed to be. Whereas players that got a hold of this game really enjoyed it.
Yeah, like exactly like what happened to us, because I had never played this game before, the last few weeks, and neither of you, right? So it was a fun find for us, and I'm glad that now I have experience with it. And you listening should definitely give it a shot, because I think this is a good one. It's on the eShop. Probably like $3 or $4.
Yeah, probably $3.99 or something like that.
Yeah, definitely pick it up and try it out. Anyways, moving on, we've got the title theme from Dinoland on the Sega Genesis, composed by Ichiro Hada.
That was the title theme from Dinoland on the Sega Genesis, composed by Ichiro Hada.
Wow, another interesting title theme track. It starts off very dark and then kind of moves over to this, I want to say like a 90s like TGIF kind of kids sitcom theme music. And then like the first thing I had written down when I was trying to think of how to describe this was the Muppet Babies.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything else to write. And I was like, man, how do I describe this? But it just has this really, I guess it does sound like theme music to me. Mm-hmm. Like I know it's the title theme, but it sounds like almost like a TV show.
Right. No, and for me, I felt like we got two snippets of two totally different Sega Genesis games. Like in the first part to me felt like something more like Golden Axe, but in a different type of setting, like maybe like an Arabian Golden Axe or something like that.
I like that. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
And then the second part, it felt like something more like cutesy and fun, kind of like I don't know, maybe like a really fun like Sonic level or something like that, where it's just like it had that very Sega Genesis sound to both parts, but one was more of like a darker, aggressive game, and one of them was more like a fun, like animal friendly game. So I really dug both parts. I thought both parts were really cool. I
liked it. Yeah,
it felt
I did.
Weird mashed together. Kind of like you turn on the game and you get to that title screen. It's like, oh, whoa, this is gonna be like dark, prehistoric, and then it's like, dude, nope, it's gonna be really fun and happy.
It threw me off because when that title screen pops up, you get these cute little dinosaurs walking around, and that music is da na 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 na, and then they like start kind of like playing with each other, or like
they're like getting chased, and then they're chasing something else.
And then you hear this really poppy music, and it's I for as goofy as it is, I actually really liked this track.
No, me too.
I thought it was really, really fun. And the rest of the soundtrack's kind of in the same boat. There's some differences, but we'll kind of get into that in a minute here.
Right.
The game came out. So this is Dinoland on the Sega Genesis, released in 1991. And in Japan, it was released called Cho Toryu Retsuden Dinoland. So a little shorter.
Yeah.
And so it was published by Renovations on the Genesis and also came out on the Sharp X68000. When I saw that, I was like, man, we gotta listen to the music from that too and just see how it compares. And it's totally different stuff. And it was very interesting to hear. So we'll be playing a little bit of that as well. It was developed by Wolf Team.
Yeah, and I have some notes on them. They are actually a Telenet Japan subsidiary, and they've developed a bunch of games like Revenge of the Ninja, Cobra Command, Soul Feast, Final Zone, Tales of Destiny 1 and 2, Tales of Eternia, Tales of Fantasia, and Valise, the Phantasm Soldier.
They've done a lot of really cool stuff, and I really appreciate a lot of what Wolf Team does. Telenet Japan is awesome already, and having this kind of internal development team doing these kind of obscure stuff, but doing it very well is, it's really cool. It's composed by Ichiro Hada, and, he hasn't really done a lot of composition outside of this game. I think there's like one other obscure Japanese title, and I feel bad that I didn't write it down, but it was very, very minimal, and I listened to it, and it was just like, very, very simplistic. But the game itself, it's, obviously another pinball game, and it follows a prehistoric theme, dinosaurs and stuff like that, hence the title. And the game has a quest mode where you play across 3 different tables. And there's also different bosses and stuff. It's actually a pretty fun little game.
Yeah, I really liked it. I actually spent, I think, the most time playing this game out of the 4 that we picked today. I do have some gripes about the look a little bit, and I feel some of that look fits very much with that song that we heard where it seemed like 2 different kind of songs. I feel like the graphics are kind of like that. There's like this very much more realistic background to the whole thing, a lot more details, little color variations and things, but then some of the sprites are very silly and very they have one color to them and they're very cartoonish, but then there's also a couple sprites that are actually a little bit more realistic looking. So I felt
very awkward. Yeah.
Like
some of the sprites, like you said, are very simplistic. They look like Barney, walking around. And
they're like little silly, cute little dinosaurs. And then there's like a more realistic looking dinosaur off to the side. And some of the other things are like that too in some of the special areas. So I felt like it was, even the graphics had a mashup of realistic and unrealistic, just like the music had a mashup of kind of dark and sinister and, really cute. So
yeah, I thought the actual physics and stuff of the game was pretty fun, but I was in the same boat with the graphics. I thought that, man, like everything looked kind of lame. It just didn't really. I don't know. Everything was kind of ugly. Like the playfield itself, I know they're trying to go for this like prehistoric theme,
right?
But putting like grass and stuff all over the playfield didn't really. I mean, it's hard to even say it's grass. It looks like somebody got like a Microsoft paintbrush tool and just kind of did the few dots here and there and kind of added it in. But even the boss, like to me, the boss sprites, the big boss and stuff that you play against, it looked like a giant potato.
I actually think that some of the sprites were pretty cool looking, and that if the playing field had been changed to something a little bit simpler, something a little bit more cute and fun, maybe not necessarily even cute, like something a little bit more cartoonish, I think it would have all looked a lot better. I think just they had too many things going on.
Right. Now, I only actually got to play 2 different tables on here. I didn't get to play all 3. So maybe do you have a little more experience with that?
I got to play all 3.
I did play Under the Sea, or the Sea level 1, and that was kind of neat. That was a lot more unique than the first Dinoland table that you start out on. I think that the gameplay is very, very basic. Even the tables seem pretty basic. I mean, the bumpers and everything that you're kind of hitting against, those are all dinosaurs. You're trying to take out these little dinosaurs, and there's maybe like a row of like 3 or 4 of them, and you have to hit the ball into them and knock them out. And there really just wasn't a lot of action in the game. There was like a slot machine at the top that kind of I never could actually get those to line up.
Okay,
maybe I did, and there was like a small bonus or something. But
I did a couple times. I got when there's a set of birds, and if you get all 3 of the birds to line up, it takes you to a bird themed play field.
Okay, so I didn't get to that one.
Right, and I was only in that one for a couple seconds because the gameplay is something that really kind of irritated me a little bit. I thought the game could have been really fun, and like I said, I played it quite a bit, but I think it was mostly because I felt there was a lot more potential to this game. One of the problems that I saw was that the ball was really small, or the space between the flippers was way too big. Like I said, when I got to that bird area, I popped in, it bounced around a couple times, and then dropped straight through the bumpers on the top level, and then straight through the bottoms, and there was no way for me to do anything.
Oh, like
so
a
I was
cheap
just
shot.
in and out, and then it did that all the time for like the boss level. It did it to the underwater level, and it was just really irritating because there's nothing I could have done. There's no way I could have made it hit those bumpers or the flippers, and
yeah, I felt like that being a turnoff, a big time turnoff.
Yeah, I mean, because there was no like skill based to any of it. It just was like just luck. Like okay, it just went down the middle. There's nothing you can do about it. So.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get into our next block of music, which is actually the good part of this game. We have 3 tracks from the Genesis lined up. We have Dinoland, Dinoland Ending, and the Sea Playfield ending music. So let's listen to those, and we'll be right back.
You just heard Dinoland Ending, and Sea Ending, composed by Ichiro Hada for Dinoland on the Sega Genesis.
All really cool tracks. That first track, Dinoland, I really like the reverse cymbals. It was like kind of like a backwards crash. I really liked that. I thought that was very clever. And they really play the hell out of that FM synth. They loved it. Ichiro Hada he was like, wow, what am I going to do here? I think I'm just going to work this synth chip.
Yeah. And I noticed that there was some pretty cool little sounds. I really like that sound that they had in there. Like some songs, they kind of do like this odd little sound here and there, and it's kind of annoying. And that one, I just thought it was kind of a neat little touch. It was a neat little accent that I noticed and liked about that track.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. Now, Dinoland Ending. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually like that one. I thought that it was a cool little track. It had a little bit more energy to it, and just kind of like how we've been seeing with a lot of ending tracks with Pinball, is that it kind of gave me a sense like, oh, I want to keep playing.
See, for me, the first thing that came into my mind, so when we played the title music, and I was like, oh, this is like a 90s like sitcom or something, like a kids show or something. This sounds like the ending credits to that kids show.
I could see that.
And I was just thinking like, man, this sounds like where you're getting the credits scrolling down the screen, and you're getting like still images from that episode, like, somebody giving each other a high five, and somebody, some guy shrugging his shoulders like, what did I do? Or,
whoops.
Yeah. It cracked me up listening to this. It's really funny. And like 45 seconds in, it gets like really, really dark for a second. And then it like goes back to that like, hey, it's over.
Yeah, no, there's that really cool guitar riff, and then like some really awesome drums, and then it's just right back to the kind of almost cheesy sound, which I actually liked for this type of a game.
No, I did too. I thought it was kind of cool. The last track, Sea Ending, this is my favorite track. I think that this is like, it's very somber, very slow, but I don't know if it feels like it's under the sea or anything like that. I don't know how you would describe it, but it felt it did feel a lot more passive than the other songs that we heard.
Right, and I thought that this track felt very emotion heavy. Like it gave me like a much more emotional type feel. Like
I can see that.
Had a little more like seriousness to it, and I really liked it as a song. I don't think it fits in the game at all.
No, not at all.
But I do think it is like one of the best songs on this entire soundtrack.
It was really cool. Yeah. It was weird because like a lot of the notes to me, even though I did like this track a lot of the notes really felt flat, like out of key. It didn't feel like it was, I guess the pitch was a little bit off, but at the same time, I kind of liked that. It almost made it more depressing. It was out of key a little bit. And so like I said, I like this track. I'm glad we played it.
And for me, as far as Underwater goes, I felt it did have some similar themes to it that a lot of games do that have underwater type stuff. Like I almost saw like a little bit of like underwater Sonic type sounds. I don't know if it's just because it's the Genesis as well, but it kind of had like a lot of those long trailing notes, and it just gave me a sense of kind of being underwater and not moving fluidly. So okay. Like that was what made me think about other games that kind of had that underwater sound. So it doesn't necessarily out of context sounds like being underwater, but when you listen to a lot of game music like how we do, we start to see other games borrow the same kind of themes and sounds. So this one had a lot more, I felt like the sounds were a lot more in the same range. There wasn't so much high and, chirpy and then deep bass all together. It was more like kind of in the mid-tone range, which to me made it feel more like muted, like being underwater.
No, I think that's really cool. We actually have a few more tracks to play, and these are from the Sharp X68000 version. It's track 3, 4, and 6. So let's listen to those, and we will be right back.
That was track 3, track 4, and track 6 from Dinoland on the Sharp X68000. And actually, we don't have a composer for these.
Yeah, it's unknown. I looked around. I couldn't find anything. You did too. Just out of luck. Even on Japanese websites, I was looking for a composer, and everything was blank. So
yeah. Well, it's a game that not a lot of people played, I'm sure, and then that's also a system that never really came here. So
yeah. So we're kind of limited on the research on it, but I still think we could find one eventually if we just keep digging. But time will come. Anyways, I like those tracks a lot. Very, very different hearing it through the Sharp X68000's YM2151 versus the Genesis 2612. I mean, they're completely different soundtracks altogether anyway.
Right.
But it's weird that whoever composed the Sharp version went this direction versus the Sega Genesis. It was out actually earlier.
Right, and I actually think that these 3 songs we just heard fit a little bit better with this game.
I think so too. Yeah,
it's simple, but it has a nice little melody to it. The first track, I did like it quite a bit. I did feel that the bell kind of tones and the drums kind of drowned out the melody, but that being said, it was still a really fun track and kind of set the pace for this block. Actually, I think it was a good starter for this block.
Yeah, I do too. The next track had a Latin and like kind of Caribbean feel to it.
Yeah,
I
wrote down tropical.
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, it reminded me of like kind of Adventure Island, like on drugs or something. It was rad. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I actually liked that one quite a bit.
The next track we played, track 6, that was crazy. That was really, really fast paced. Like there's like tons of like 30-second notes in there, and it's hard to wrap your head around like what's going on, but it's pretty interesting. It's not a lot of melody to it, but just all that crazy action at once kind of throws you off. So I was like, we should put this in there.
Yeah, no, I really like that track. That was my favorite of the 3. And
really?
Yeah, and it was just fast paced and kind of got me going. I'm guessing that's probably where you enter your name from after the game.
After we're playing these other ones, yeah, who knows?
But I really liked that there was like this dee like sound. Like I really liked that was just kind of thrown in there, and it just was really fun. I thought this was like definitely fast paced compared to the other ones, but it was just really fun and energetic.
The game itself on the X68000 is pretty identical other than the music with the Genesis version. So if you had more experience playing that version over the Genesis version, let us know if there's any differences that you noticed. But for me, it looked identical, like in everything, the title screen, everything. It was just the music that threw me off. So, take it as you will. We didn't really care for it too much, but if you like it and you want to tell us your opinions on it, please let us know. I think that about wraps up the show, though, James.
Yeah, I think we can do a wrap-up.
Yeah.
So we covered Pinbot on the NES, arranged by David Wise.
And Pinball Dreams on the Super NES and Amiga, composed by Olof Gustafsson, and then rearranged by Martin Walker.
And we followed that up with Revenge of the Gator on Game Boy, composed by Hiroaki Suga.
And then we had Dinoland on the Sega Genesis and the Sharp X68000, composed by Ichiro Hada, and then on the Sharp version, we don't really know. So if you guys know, like, please tell us. It'll definitely close that void in our hearts. Anyways, thanks for listening. You can visit us online at pixelatedaudio.com. We're also on Twitter. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher. Please leave a review. We'd really appreciate it. It's good to hear some feedback. If there's things that you don't like about the show, please let us know. That's how we kind of evolve and change kind of our formats and stuff like that. We'd love to hear from you.
We're getting up there in episode numbers now, so make sure to check out some of the other episodes we had. Like we just had a Mega Man, Sonic, a really awesome composer by the name of Chase Bethia on an episode.
Yeah, it was fun.
So we're looking forward to future guests and stuff like that as well. Today, we don't have an OC Remix track taking us out, but instead we have one from Remix 64.
Another site I spend just way too much time on.
Yeah. The track taking us out is called Electro House Sid Remix by Isacco Garcia Peveri from the Amiga version of Pinball Dreams.
Thanks again, and see you guys in a few weeks.
Bye.